The Danish physicist and Nobelist Niels Bohr once hung a horseshoe over his doorway. Appalled friends exclaimed that surely he didn't put any trust in such pathetic superstition. "No, I don't," he replied with composure. "But apparently it works, whether you believe in it or not." That might be the safest conclusion. The most comprehensive investigation of the subject ever conducted, a study of the therapeutic effects of intercessory prayer of 2006, could find no correlation at all between the number and regularity of prayers offered and the likelihood that the person being prayed for would have improved chances. But it did find a small but interesting negative correlation, in that some patients suffered slight additional woe when they failed to manifest any improvement. They felt that they had disappointed their devoted supporters, and morale is another unquantifiable factor in survival. I now understand this better than I did when I first read it. An enormous number of secular and atheist friends have told me encouraging and flattering things like, "If anyone can beat this, you can. Cancer has no chance against someone like you. We know you can vanquish this." On bad days, and even on better ones, such exhortations can have a vaguely depressing effect. If I check out, I'll be letting all these comrades down. A different secular problem also occurs to me. What if I pulled through and the pious faction contentedly claimed that their prayers had been answered? That would somehow be irritating. I've saved the best of the faithful until the last. Dr. Francis Collins is one of the greatest living Americans. He's the man who brought the Human Genome Project to completion, ahead of time and under budget, and who now directs the National Institutes of Health. In his work on the genetic origins of disorder, he helped decode the misprints that cause such calamities as cystic fibrosis and Huntington's disease. He's working now on the amazing healing properties that are latent in stem cells and in targeted gene-based treatments. This great humanitarian is also a devotee of the work of C.S. Lewis, and in his book, The Language of God, has set out the case for making science compatible with faith. This small volume contains an admirably terse chapter informing fundamentalists that the argument about evolution is over, mainly because there is no argument. I know Francis, too, from various public and private debates over religion. He's been kind enough to visit me in his own time and to discuss all sorts of novel treatments, only recently even imaginable, that might apply to my case. And let me put it this way. He hasn't suggested prayer, and I, in turn, haven't teased him about the screw-tape letters. So those who want me to die in agony are really praying that the efforts of our most selfless Christian physician be thwarted. Who is Dr. Collins to interfere with the divine design? By a similar twist, those who want me to burn in hell are also mocking those kind religious folk who don't find me unsalvageably evil. I leave these paradoxes to those, friends and enemies, who still venerate the supernatural. Pursuing the prayer thread through the labyrinth of the web, I eventually found a bizarre place bets video. This invites potential punters to put money on whether I will repudiate my atheism and embrace religion by a certain date, or continue to affirm unbelief and take the hellish consequences. This isn't perhaps as cheap or as nasty as it may sound. One of Christianity's most cerebral defenders, Blaise Pascal, reduced the essentials to a wager as far back as the 17th century. Put your faith in the Almighty, he proposed, and you stand to gain everything. Decline the heavenly offer, and you lose everything if the coin falls the other way. Some philosophers also call this Pascal's gambit. Ingenious though the full reasoning of his essay may be, he was one of the founders of probability theory, Pascal assumes both a cynical God and an abjectly opportunist human being. Suppose I ditch the principles I've held for a lifetime in the hope of gaining favour at the last minute. I hope and trust that no serious person will be at all impressed by such a hucksterish choice. Meanwhile, the God who would reward cowardice and dishonesty and punish irreconcilable doubt is among the many gods in whom I do not believe. I don't mean to be churlish about any kind intentions, but when September the 20th comes, please don't trouble deaf heaven with your bootless cries. Unless, of course, it makes you feel better. Many listeners are familiar with the spirit and the letter of the definition of prayer as given by Ambrose Bierce in his Devil's Dictionary. It runs like this, and is extremely easy to comprehend. Prayer, a petition that the laws of nature be suspended in favour of the petitioner, himself confessedly unworthy. Everybody can see the joke that is lodged within this entry. The man who prays is the one who thinks that God has arranged matters all wrong, but who also thinks that he can instruct God how to put them right. Half buried in the contradiction is the distressing idea that nobody is in charge, or nobody with any moral authority. The call to prayer is self-cancelling. Those of us who don't take part in it will justify our abstention on the grounds that we don't need or care to undergo the futile process of continuous reinforcement. Either our convictions are enough in themselves, or they're not. At any rate, they do require standing in a crowd and uttering constant and uniform incantations. This is ordered by one religion to take place 5 times a day, and by other monotheists for almost that number, while all of them set aside at least one whole day for the exclusive praise of the Lord. And Judaism seems to consist in its original constitution of a huge list of prohibitions that must be followed before all else. The tone of the prayers replicates the silliness of the mandate, in that God is enjoined or thanked to do what he was going to do anyway. Thus the Jewish male begins each day by thanking God for not making him into a woman, or a Gentile, while the Jewish woman contents herself with thanking the Almighty for creating her as she is. Presumably, the Almighty is pleased to receive this tribute to his power and the approval of those he created. It's just that if he is truly Almighty, the achievement would seem rather a slight one. Much the same applies to the idea that prayer, instead of making Christianity look foolish, makes it appear convincing. We'll just say with Christianity today. Now, it can be asserted with some confidence, first, that its deity is all-wise and all-powerful, and second, that its congregants stand in desperate need of that deity's infinite wisdom and power. Just to give some elementary quotations, it's stated in the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verse 6, "Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God." Deuteronomy, chapter 32, verse 4, proclaims that He is the rock, His work is perfect. And Isaiah, chapter 64, verse 8, tells us, "Now, O Lord, thou art our Father. We art clay, and thou art potter, and we are all the work of thy hand." Note then that Christianity insists on the absolute dependence of its flock, and then only on the offering of undiluted praise and thanks. A person using prayer time to ask for the world to be set to rights, or to beseech God to bestow a favour upon himself, would in effect be guilty of a profound blasphemy, or at the very least a pathetic misunderstanding. It's not for the mere human to be presuming that he or she can advise the divine, and this, sad to say, opens religion to the additional charge of corruption. The leaders of the Church know perfectly well that prayer is not intended to gratify the devout, so that every time they accept a donation in return for some petition, they're accepting a gross negation of their faith, a faith that depends on the passive acceptance of the devout and not on their making demands for betterment. Eventually, and after a bitter and schismatic quarrel, practices like the notorious sale of indulgences were abandoned. But many a fine basilica or chantry would not be standing today if this awful violation had not turned such a spectacularly good profit. And today, it's easy enough to see at the revival meetings of Protestant fundamentalists the counting of the checks and bills before the laying on of hands by the preacher has even been completed. Again, the spectacle is a shameless one, with the Calvinists having in some ways replaced Rome as the most exorbitant holy fundraisers. And, before we run out of contradictions, it seems doubly absurd for a Calvinist to take an interest in divine intercession. The founding constitution of the Presbyterian Church famously proclaimed from Philadelphia that, by the decree of God for the manifestation of his glory, some men and angels are predestinated unto everlasting life, and others foreordained for everlasting death, without any foresight of faith or good works, or perseverance in either of them, or any other thing in the creature, as conditions. Plainly put, this means that it doesn't matter whether you try to lead a holy life or even succeed in doing so. Random caprice will still determine whether or not you receive a heavenly reward. In these circumstances, the emptiness of prayer is almost the least of it. Beyond that minor futility, the religion which treats its flock as a credulous plaything offers one of the cruelest spectacles that can be imagined. A human being in fear and doubt, who is openly exploited to believe in the impossible. In the argument over prayer, then, please do not be shocked if it is we atheists who wear the pitying look as any moment of moral crisis threatens to draw near.